Margaret Meg Hanlon pressed tissues against her bleeding nose in the cramped airplane lavatory, trying to clean the blood from her torn jacket before someone noticed. At 72, she'd survived combat zones from Bosnia to Iraq. But nothing had prepared her for the humiliation of being dragged down an airplane aisle by federal air marshals while passengers recorded everything on their phones. The pounding on the bathroom door grew louder, followed by shouting about federal crimes and resisting arrest. And Meg knew her last chance to see her granddaughter was slipping away with every drop of blood that fell into the tiny sink. The door exploded inward as air marshals forced entry into the lavatory. Strong hands grabbed her arms and pulled her into the aisle, where Officer Dale Kessler from the Shreveport Police Department stood holding his jaw and pointing an accusing finger. "That woman assaulted a police officer," Kessler announced to the cabin full of passengers. "Completely unprovoked attack. I want charges filed." Meg didn't resist as they cuffed her hands behind her back. She'd learned long ago that fighting only made things worse, and at her age, the metal restraints felt heavier than the gear she'd carried through 3 deployments. The other passengers stared with a mixture of curiosity and disgust, seeing only an elderly woman who'd apparently lost her mind at 30,000 feet. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent," the air marshal said as he guided her toward the front of the plane. "Anything you say can and will be used against you." Meg closed her eyes and let them lead her away, thinking about the letter in her carry-on bag, the first communication she'd received from her daughter in 12 years, an invitation to her granddaughter's high school graduation. The ticket to Phoenix had cost her 3 months' worth of grocery money, but it was supposed to be her chance to rebuild the family she'd lost when her military career imploded. 24 hours earlier, Meg had been sitting in the departure lounge at Denver International Airport, nursing a cup of coffee that cost more than she usually spent on food in a day. The flight to Phoenix represented everything she had left: $600 in savings, a borrowed suitcase, and hope that her daughter might finally forgive her for choosing duty over family one too many times. The trouble started when they assigned her seat 12F next to the emergency exit. The flight attendant made the standard announcement about able-bodied passengers and emergency procedures, and Meg had nodded automatically. She'd been through enough real emergencies to know how to open a door and help people escape. Officer Dale Kessler had boarded late, a big man in civilian clothes with a Louisiana accent and the kind of swagger that came from wearing a badge for 20 years. He'd squeezed into seat 12E beside her, immediately claiming both armrests and making it clear he wasn't happy about flying coach. "Military?" he'd asked, nodding toward the small army pin on Meg's jacket. "Retired." "What did you do? Desk job? Supply?" "Intelligence." Kessler had laughed, the sound carrying no humor. "Intelligence. Right. Let me guess. You were one of those women who got every good man in your unit written up for looking at you wrong." Meg had turned toward the window, hoping to avoid conversation with a man who clearly had issues with women in uniform. But Kessler wasn't finished. "I served too, you know. Iraq, Afghanistan. Real combat, not whatever they had you doing in some air-conditioned office." "I wasn't in an office." "Sure you weren't. You were probably one of those false flag operators, crying harassment every time someone told a joke or looked at you sideways." The plane had started taxiing, and Meg had tried to focus on the safety demonstration. But Kessler kept talking, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. "You know what's wrong with the military today? Too many women playing soldier, getting real warriors kicked out for stupid shit. Political correctness run amok." Other passengers were starting to notice the one-sided conversation. A businessman across the aisle put down his newspaper and frowned. The flight attendant approached their row, but Kessler showed her his badge and she backed away. "Sir, Please keep your voice down, Meg had said quietly. Don't tell me what to do, lady. I've got every right to speak my mind. He'd accidentally elbowed her in the ribs while reaching for his bag, then done it again when she tried to move away. When Meg finally pushed his arm away from her space, Kessler had shouted, "Assault!" and 3 passengers had immediately started recording. The video they captured showed only Meg's defensive movement, not the provocation that had led to it. By the time the plane landed in Phoenix, the footage was already being uploaded to social media with captions about "crazy veteran attacks cop." The Maricopa County Jail was a concrete monument to human misery, filled with people who'd made bad choices or found themselves in impossible situations. Meg sat on a narrow bunk in an orange jumpsuit, staring at legal papers she couldn't afford to fight and trying to understand how her life had gone so wrong so quickly. Her court-appointed attorney was a tired young man named Kevin Walsh, who handled 50 cases at a time and had maybe 10 minutes to discuss her situation. "Mrs. Hanlon, the prosecution is offering a plea deal. Assault in the 4th degree, 6 months probation, anger management classes. You'll avoid jail time." "I didn't assault anyone. I was defending myself." "Ma'am, there's video evidence of you striking Officer Kessler. Multiple witnesses. The jury's going to see an elderly woman attacking a police officer for no apparent reason." "There was a reason. He was harassing me, trying to provoke a response." Walsh looked at his notes without much interest. "Even if that's true, it doesn't justify physical violence. My advice is to take the plea. And if I don't, then you're looking at 2 years in prison for assaulting a law enforcement officer. At your age, Mrs. Hanlon, that could be a death sentence." Meg signed the papers because she didn't have a choice. But that night she wrote a letter to the only person she could think of who might understand what had really happened. Judge Patricia Williams had been a young Army lawyer in Bosnia when Meg was running intelligence operations, and they'd worked together on several cases involving military personnel accused of war crimes. Judge Williams was retired now, living in Scottsdale, but she still remembered the sergeant who'd helped her navigate the political minefield of prosecuting American soldiers for atrocities committed against civilians. The letter arrived 3 days before Meg's sentencing hearing, hand-delivered by a process server who also carried a motion to dismiss all charges. "Your Honor, I'm Patricia Williams, retired federal judge, and I'm requesting permission to represent Mrs. Hanlon pro bono in this matter." Judge Robert Martinez looked surprised to see such distinguished counsel appearing for a defendant who'd been relying on a public defender. Williams was known throughout Arizona's legal community as someone who didn't take cases unless she believed in them completely. "Judge Williams, this is highly irregular. Mrs. Hanlon has already accepted a plea agreement." "Your Honor, I believe Mrs. Hanlon was coerced into that plea by ineffective counsel and prosecutorial misconduct. I'm moving to withdraw the plea and requesting a full jury trial." The prosecutor, a career bureaucrat named James Henderson, looked annoyed. "Your Honor, this case is settled. Mrs. Hanlon admitted guilt." "Actually, Mr. Henderson, I've discovered some interesting information about your star witness. Officer Dale Kessler was discharged from the Army in 2019 for sexual harassment and conduct unbecoming. He was subsequently hired by the Shreveport Police Department without a background check." Judge Martinez frowned. "How is this relevant to the current charges?" "It's relevant because Officer Kessler has a documented pattern of targeting women veterans. My investigation has uncovered 3 other incidents where he's provoked confrontations with female service members, then filed assault charges when they defended themselves." Williams placed a thick folder on the defense table. "I have statements from 2 other women who were harassed by Officer Kessler on flights, both of whom were pressured into plea agreements to avoid trial. I also have the complete security footage from the airplane, not just the edited clip that was released to social media. Henderson stood up quickly. Your Honor, this is a fishing expedition. Officer Kessler's military record has no bearing on this case. On the contrary, Williams replied calmly. Officer Kessler's history of targeting women veterans is directly relevant to his credibility and his motives in this case. Judge Martinez reviewed the documents Williams had submitted, his expression growing more troubled with each page. Mr. Henderson, I'm inclined to grant the motion to withdraw the plea agreement. This case is going to trial. The trial lasted 3 days and drew national attention as details about Officer Kessler's background emerged. Williams methodically dismantled the prosecution's case, starting with the complete airplane security footage that showed Kessler deliberately provoking Meg and physically intimidating her for nearly an hour before she defended herself. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Williams said in her opening statement, this case isn't about an elderly woman losing her temper on an airplane. It's about a predator with a badge who has made a career of targeting vulnerable women and using the system to punish them when they refuse to be victims. 3 women testified about their encounters with Kessler. A female Marine who'd been arrested at a traffic stop after refusing his advances. A Navy veteran who'd been charged with disorderly conduct when she complained about his behavior at a veterans event. And an Air Force officer who'd been forced to resign after Kessler filed false harassment charges against her. The most damaging testimony came from Kessler himself, who became defensive and hostile under cross-examination. Officer Kessler, isn't it true that you were discharged from the Army for sexual harassment? That was a misunderstanding. Political correctness run amok. Isn't it true that you told Mrs. Hanlon that women in the military were responsible for false harassment claims? I was making conversation. By telling a combat veteran that she was probably a false flag operator? I have a right to my opinion. Williams played the complete airplane footage, showing Kessler's escalating aggression and Meg's repeated attempts to avoid confrontation. Officer Kessler, does this look like conversation to you? On the video, Kessler could be seen deliberately invading Meg's space, making aggressive gestures, and finally elbowing her in the ribs while looking directly at the passengers who were recording. It was an accident? 2 accidents, Officer Kessler? In the space of 10 minutes. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty on all charges. Outside the courthouse, Meg found herself surrounded by reporters asking about her plans to sue the police department and the prosecutor's office. She answered their questions politely but briefly, eager to escape the media circus that had consumed the last month of her life. She was walking toward the parking garage when she heard a familiar voice call her name. Mom? Meg turned to see her daughter Sarah standing beside a pickup truck, holding the hand of a teenage girl who looked exactly like Sarah had at that age. Sarah, how did you... Judge Williams called me, explained what really happened. Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. I'm sorry I let 12 years go by without talking to you. The teenage girl stepped forward shyly. Grandma Meg? I'm Rebecca. Mom told me you were in the Army. Meg knelt down to her granddaughter's level, tears streaming down her face. I was a sergeant, and I spent every day wishing I could come home to meet you. Maybe now you can, Sarah said. If you want to. They drove to Sarah's house in silence. 3 generations of women trying to figure out how to rebuild relationships that had been damaged by pride, duty, and misunderstanding. Rebecca chattered about school and friends and college plans, filling the car with the kind of normal family conversation Meg had dreamed about for years. At Sarah's house, a modest ranch home with a well-tended garden, Meg found herself in a kitchen filled with photographs of the granddaughter she'd missed watching grow up. High school graduation pictures, sports teams, family vacations, 12 years of memories that didn't include her. "I kept meaning to call," Sarah said as she made coffee, "especially after Dad died. But I was so angry about the way your career ended, about the accusations." "The accusations were true," Meg said quietly. "I did show unauthorized sympathy to enemy prisoners. I gave medical supplies to civilian families. I broke regulations. But you saved lives. I cost American soldiers their careers because I couldn't keep my mouth shut about war crimes. The Army had every right to discharge me." Sarah poured coffee into 3 mugs, sat down across from her mother. "Judge Williams told me about your service record, about the commendations, the lives you saved, the intelligence you gathered. She said you were one of the most decorated women in your unit. Judge Williams is being generous. She also said you were the only person brave enough to testify against officers who were torturing prisoners. That's why they really came after you." Meg sipped her coffee and looked around the kitchen, noting the small details that spoke of a life well lived. Children's artwork on the refrigerator, family photos on the walls, the comfortable chaos of a home where people actually lived. "I made my choices. I accepted the consequences. But you shouldn't have had to choose between doing the right thing and protecting your family." Rebecca looked up from her homework. "Grandma Meg, were you really a spy?" "I was an intelligence analyst. I tried to figure out who the bad guys were and how to stop them." "Did you carry a gun?" "Sometimes." "Were you scared?" Meg considered the question seriously. "Every day. But being scared doesn't mean you stop doing your job." That evening, as Rebecca showed her grandmother old photo albums and talked about her plans to study international relations in college, Meg felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The sense of belonging somewhere, of being part of a family that wanted her there. The letter arrived the next morning, delivered by courier to Sarah's front door. The return address was the Department of Defense, and the signature at the bottom belonged to the Secretary of the Army. "Mrs. Hanlon," the letter read, "a recent review of your service record has resulted in the reversal of your discharge classification. Your retirement has been changed to honorable status, with full restoration of benefits and pension payments retroactive to your original separation date. Additionally, you are hereby awarded the Army Commendation Medal with Valor for actions taken during Operation Iraqi Freedom that resulted in the prevention of war crimes and the protection of civilian populations. Your service to this nation has not been forgotten." Meg read the letter 3 times before showing it to Sarah, who cried as she read about her mother's vindication after so many years of unofficial disgrace. "What does this mean?" Sarah asked. "It means I can afford to help Rebecca with college," Meg said, smiling through her own tears. "And maybe I can stop worrying about having enough money for groceries." But more than the money or the recognition, what mattered most was sitting in her daughter's kitchen, drinking coffee and watching her granddaughter do homework, knowing that she'd finally found her way home after decades of carrying the weight of choices that had cost her everything she'd thought she wanted. The 5th door on the airplane had been an emergency exit, a way out when everything went wrong. It turned out that sometimes the emergency exit led exactly where you needed to go,